Hello, and welcome back to Human Behavior Lab. I'm New York, your host and observer. Today, we're looking at something that happens in almost every home, every family, every shared living space, yet we rarely talk about it honestly.
Hey everyone, I'm Juan, and honestly, when I heard today's topic, I immediately thought about all those times I got into silly arguments with my family. Like over nothing. Does that happen to you too?
It happens to most people. And that's precisely what we're examining today. A recent study from neuroscience research has given us data on something many have experienced but few understood structurally: why constant contact in confined conditions increases conflict.
Wait, so there's actual science behind why we fight more when we spend more time together. I always thought it was just us being difficult.
That's a common assumption. But let's look at what the research actually shows. The study examined how people behave when they're in close physical proximity for extended periods, think shared apartments, family homes, or situations like lockdowns.
Okay, so what did they find? Are we just naturally argumentative?
Not quite. The findings point to something more structural. When people are in constant close contact, two things happen simultaneously. First, there's what researchers call sensory saturation. Your brain receives repetitive input from the same sources. Second, there's a reduction in what we call recovery zones, spaces where you can decompress without social demands.
Recovery zones. I think I get it. Like, when I lived alone, I could just sit in silence after work. But living with others, there's always someone there, always some noise, always presence.
Exactly. And here's where it becomes interesting from a behavioral perspective. The absence of recovery zones doesn't just make you tired, it fundamentally changes how you process social information.
Can you break that down a bit more? What do you mean by process social information?
Of course. When you interact with someone, your brain is constantly performing calculations, interpreting their words, reading their tone, predicting their reactions, managing your own responses. This requires significant cognitive resources. Under normal conditions, you have breaks between interactions, time to reset.
But when you're always around someone, there are no breaks.
Precisely. Your brain enters what we might call a state of continuous social vigilance. Even when you're not actively talking, part of your awareness remains engaged with the other person's presence. Over time, this depletes the cognitive resources you need for patience, empathy, and emotional regulation.
So we're not being difficult, our brains are just exhausted?
That's a fair way to frame it. But let's look at how this actually manifests in behavior, because the pattern is quite specific. The research identified several mechanisms that drive conflict in these conditions. The first is what psychologists call negative sentiment override. When you're cognitively depleted, your brain starts interpreting neutral actions as negative.
Oh wow, that explains so much. Like when my roommate leaves a cup on the table, and normally I wouldn't care, but suddenly it feels like they're doing it on purpose to annoy me.
That's a textbook example. Your brain, in its depleted state, creates a narrative of intentionality around actions that might be completely neutral. This is called the fundamental attribution error, and it becomes much more pronounced when your cognitive resources are drained.
Fundamental attribution error. Can you explain that in simpler terms?
Certainly. It's the tendency to attribute other people's behavior to their character, who they are, rather than their circumstances. So when your roommate leaves that cup, you think they're inconsiderate rather than they were rushing to work. Under normal conditions, you might give them the benefit of the doubt. When depleted, you jump to the negative interpretation.
That's kind of scary, actually. Our brains are making us see the worst in people.
There's more. The second mechanism is predictability fatigue. When you spend extensive time with someone, you become highly familiar with their patterns, their habits, their sounds, their movements. Paradoxically, this familiarity can breed irritation rather than comfort.
Wait, that seems backwards. Shouldn't familiarity make things easier?
It often does initially. But there's a threshold. When you're exposed to the same patterns continuously without variation, your brain starts to find them increasingly salient, more noticeable, and eventually, more annoying. Think of it like a song you loved, played on repeat for hours. Eventually, you can't stand it.
So the things we normally ignore, someone chewing, the way they breathe, how they type, those become unbearable?
For many people, yes. The research calls this sensitization through repeated exposure. It's particularly strong for sounds and movements that your brain categorizes as unnecessary or avoidable. The sound of someone chewing with their mouth open might be tolerable for one meal. After 300 meals together, it can become a trigger.
300 meals. That really puts it in perspective. We're not designed for this level of constant contact, are we?
That's an insightful question. Let's examine what happens when we look at this through the lens of human evolutionary history. For most of human history, we lived in small groups, yes. But even within those groups, there was significant physical separation throughout the day. People would disperse for hunting, gathering, farming, or other tasks. Extended periods of close indoor contact with the same individuals was actually quite rare.
So modern life, apartments, offices, houses where we're always inside together is kind of unnatural?
Let's say it's a significant departure from the conditions our social cognition evolved under. The study points out that our conflict resolution mechanisms seem calibrated for intermittent contact, not continuous presence.
That makes me think about the pandemic lockdowns. Suddenly, everyone was home all the time. No wonder tensions were so high.
The lockdowns provided an unfortunate but valuable real-world experiment. Reports of increased domestic conflict weren't just anecdotal, they followed predictable patterns based on the mechanisms we've discussed. Confined space plus constant contact plus reduced external outlets created a perfect environment for interpersonal friction.
But here's what I don't understand. Some families seem to get closer during lockdowns, not more conflicted. How does that fit?
An excellent observation. The research indicates that outcomes depend heavily on what we might call protective factors. These include established patterns of healthy communication, access to some form of private space, even if minimal, and crucially, awareness of these dynamics.
Awareness? You mean just knowing this can happen helps?
Significantly. When people understand that their irritation is a predictable response to conditions rather than a reflection of their relationship's quality, they're less likely to escalate conflicts. They can attribute their feelings to the situation, I'm depleted from constant contact, rather than to the other person, they're being annoying.
That's actually really hopeful. So understanding the structure gives us some control over it.
To an extent. There's also the factor of what researchers call relationship resilience, the pre-existing strength of the bond. Relationships with strong foundations tend to weather constant contact better, though even they show signs of strain over extended periods.
But what about those of us who don't have perfect relationships? Is there anything we can actually do?
There are structural approaches that help. Let's examine what the research suggests. The most effective intervention is creating what researchers call psychological distance, periods where you're not required to attend to others. This doesn't necessarily mean physical separation, though that helps. It can mean designated quiet hours, headphone policies, or accepted periods of non-interaction.
So it's okay to just not talk to the people you live with sometimes?
Not only okay, according to the research, it's necessary for maintaining healthy relationships. The expectation of constant availability is actually corrosive to relationship quality. Normalizing disconnection protects the connection.
That's such a shift from how we usually think. We're taught that spending time together is always good, and wanting space means something's wrong.
That cultural narrative deserves examination. The study suggests we'd benefit from reframing time apart not as a failure of closeness, but as a maintenance requirement for closeness, like charging a battery so it can function.
I love that analogy. We can't run on empty and expect to be patient and kind.
Precisely. There's also value in what we might call conflict anticipation. When you know you're entering a period of close contact, family gatherings, shared travel, cohabitation, you can prepare by discussing expectations, establishing signals for needing space, and normalizing the fact that irritation will arise.
It's like preventive maintenance for relationships.
That's an excellent framing. And for those already in conflict patterns, understanding these mechanisms can reduce the secondary damage, the belief that conflict means the relationship is broken. Often, it simply means the conditions need adjustment.
This has really changed how I see arguments with the people close to me. It's not that we don't care about each other. It's that we're human brains trying to function in conditions that challenge us.
That's the structural perspective. We're not judging people for their reactions, we're understanding why those reactions occur. And with that understanding comes the possibility of working with our nature rather than against it.
Thank you, New York. This actually makes me feel better about, well, being human.
That's the goal of observation, to replace judgment with understanding. Thank you for exploring this with us today. Until next time, keep observing.